quick introduction to part two with John Lynskey, resident historian at the Big House Museum and publisher of Hittin the Note magazine, whole bunch of other stuff. John and I had a great conversation that spanned a couple hours. So I broke it up to give folks a little bit of a rest to roll into the second part of the conversation.
Did they play they played Miami in '89? They surely played Miami in '89.
They didn't play Miami, but they played Fort Lauderdale, Sunrise Musical in Fort Lauderdale. Great venue.
Sunrise.
Great venue. They did two shows at Sunrise. Two shows I never ever thought would ever happen. I'll never forget how excited I was. And I knew who Haynes was. I had no idea who Alan Woody was. And I knew a little bit about Johnny Neal, but what Haynes and Betts did, because Dickie was still in his absolute prime.
Yes.
He still had it. And Haynes brought out the best in Dickie. And it was the traditional, Dickie playing Dickie and Warren playing Duane.
Right.
And it was unbelievable.
You raise a very good point about Danny Toler and that particular thing. Because Toler and Dickie played so similarly, the difference in the sound wasn't there, the push-pull. Plus, it pushed Dickie into a different kind of role because he never had that, kind of Duane role or as he went. And I had a friend tell me a long time ago about Dan, probably his greatest flaw is being the least regarded guitarist in the greatest guitar band in history, like you said, and he's still, I'm going to say on record, that's not disparaging Dan Toler as a guitarist. He was a fantastic guitarist, and in Light and Drugs, all you got to do is listen to that or those live shows. It's not Dan Toler's fault. It's not David Goldfleece's fault that they made those two terrible records and went the direction that they went. But Warren was a whole different thing. So I wanted to tell you mine because I know you were there. We've talked about this before. 1993, November, the Allman Brothers make this real quick trip through Florida. I have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. But they played Gainesville, then Brevard County, and then they played the South Florida Fairgrounds, which was the show I went to.
Yeah.
I went expecting Lynyrd Skynyrd. I really did. I expected the whole, I expected a nostalgia act. I did not expect to hear the Allman Brothers Band sounding vibrant and new, intense and intentional. They opened, I think they opened with Hot Atlanta, but they played like 3 or 4 songs from Where It All Begins, including Back Where It All Begins, I think All Night Train. So it's like a lot of new songs. So you were there. And now I know behind the scenes that Dickie had just returned to the band after a short absence, a little leave of absence, and came back really renewed and ready to go. At least that's what I had understood, was in good shape. Everybody sounded in good shape. What do you remember about that little window in Allman Brother history, November of '93? Or what do you know now?
What I remembered is they played a version of Mountain Jam, a short version for the first time in forever. And that was a concession from Dickie, who had absolutely refused to play it at all. And, behind the scenes, he went through a rough patch, and that's when they brought in Jack Pearson for the first time and David Grissom and the infamous Zakk Wylde show.
Right.
So those 3 little shows, little run of 3 shows in South Florida was to test the waters again. And, Dickie came back, and it was still happening. So it was really sort of, are we still going to do this kind of thing? And it worked. And it worked. Yeah.
Okay. Matt, thank you for bringing up Mountain Jam because, of course, I had no idea, like you said, right? How do you get the info that they'd stopped playing Mountain Jam? All I knew it was great, and I wanted to hear it every time I heard them. And so when they played it, I was like, I've listened back. Actually, I have a copy of it, so somehow I got a copy of it.
Yeah.
the arrangement, actually, John, they redid for that True Gravity in 1996. It's got the exact same vamp as that True Gravity in 1996. Yeah. And that was like, again, right, when we are historians, but we are also at heart, we're archivists. We're always like digging for that like gem somewhere. And that was like, because man.
Yeah, it was. I wasn't expecting it. That's for sure. You know?
And then, okay. All right. You have, I wanted to ask you favorite archival shows, not necessarily shows that you've released or you've been involved in. Okay. So then I want to go chronologically. Do you have a favorite 1970 Allman Brothers bootleg show?
Yeah. Got a couple. Swarthmore College, Philly, late April, early May, 1970.
Yep.
Tremendous show where they got into some really unusual things. They had both Juicy Carter and Tom Doucette playing on a couple of things, which was really unusual. Swarthmore is great. Oh, March 1970, The Warehouse in New Orleans. Tremendous. Short. They opened I think they were opening either for BB or Freddie King, and they only got, not even an hour. But man, very early version of Liz Reed that is killer. So those from 70. And then there's the Fillmore East February of 70 shows that we did actually put out. But Swarthmore and Warehouse March of 70 are two of my favorites from that era.
Awesome. Mike, the first one I ever got was, of course, Ludlow Garage. That had been officially released. I had no connection to the world. And I dearly love those because we have a whole bunch from July. Atlanta Pop, then you've got, little bits that we have from Love Valley, and we got the SUNY Stony Brook shows.
Stony Brook,
the one that came out maybe about a decade ago that was in front of like 100 people. Those are cool because, Allman, they're, few and far between from 1970. We've got a bunch of shows where we really have a lot more shows is 71. For several reasons. The band was prepping to record and recording some things, and then they were the hottest band, one of the hottest bands in the country, touring at later 71. Got a favorite 71 show?
Oh, yeah, several. Fillmore West that we did put out. There's the Dreams You Wanted from, Fillmore East. It's on Fillmore West.
Good point.
There is You Want Another Dreams, Brewer Fieldhouse, February 1971. That's my favorite Dreams. They were on fire at Brewer Fieldhouse. There's another great Warehouse show, March 21st, I think, 1971, that is, Duane goes so far out on Liz Reed, it's like, you got to be kidding me. And Richard Brent, the executive director at the Big House, he talks about it. Duane was starting to get into, the great what if. What if Duane had lived? Everybody says, well, he would have gone into jazz. Well, yeah, because he did with Push Push and Herbie Mann's album, but he was also starting to get into this drop D tuning, sort of heavy metal thing. And you hear it in that Liz Reed, you hear it in You Don't Love Me. So that's one that people should look up. The rest we've put out, there's Syria Mosque, there's Down in Texas that have come out. I'm trying to think, is there anything else from 70?
You did the final Stony Brook 919.
Yeah, did the final.
That's the Dreams. You're absolutely right. The Dreams they were playing in spring 1971, we've got on the Fillmore West and definitely that Brewer Fieldhouse, which is, I remember when we talked about this, I was like, John, do you know of any other time they played it between the 28th and 313 when they recorded it? I just am curious. And both of us, had come to the same conclusion. It ain't there. If you ain't find it, and I didn't find it, it ain't gonna be there. And so, I really love that Dreams. And sometimes what I'll do, because my other one is that Warehouse 91671,
Yeah,
which
916. Yeah.
just started circulating when I came into the tape trading. We had just gotten a couple.
Yeah.
I eventually secured a metal cassette master off of the original reel, more or less, I guess, a second generation, but it was a metal master tape. And sometimes for shits and giggles, I will put into my at Fillmore East mix that I listen to a billion times a year. I'll add that Dreams from 1971 just to just to feel good about it. I keep putting it in different spots into the thing just because I love it so much.
See, we've come about this close to putting that one out, and it still might happen because it's also got the Blue Sky on it, which Stony Brook does, and that's what makes Stony Brook, such a cool show. Also, the chemicals that they were indulging in. The first half of the show was cocaine. The second half of the show was heroin, and you can hear it. That's why Dreams is so dreamy. That's why Blue Sky is so stretched out. That's why You Don't Love Me went for 30 minutes. Because the first part of the show, it's frenetic. I mean, it's just boom, 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 boom.
Yep.
Second half of the show, a little bit more mellow, and that's why.
That has to be what's going on at the Warehouse too, because I always used to think the first half of that show, they were just, hit it and rip it. They were going fast 3 days earlier. So clearly, that's what's going on there. I think it's nuts that you saw that Sportatorium show, Hollywood Sportatorium, a dump of all dumps in the history of dumps. You saw a show that eventually gets released in 1972, January 72. I'm sorry, not released. It's been recorded at you can get to it. 5-man band show. Do you have now, in hindsight, because nobody's ready at 12 for the first time they receive something like the Allman Brothers. I'm sorry, nobody's ready at 12 to receive, I don't think, Hollywood Sportatorium rock and roll concert in 1970. It's like me going to the Orange Bowl for the first time and maybe watch 10 plays because there was so much shit going on around me. It was the most amazing thing. It was like a circus, But do you have did you come to say, oh, this is my favorite do you have a favorite 5-man band show from 72?
Yeah, Syracuse.
Manley Fieldhouse, baby.
We put it out, and I would encourage anyone that doesn't have that show to go out and get it, because the 5-man band period, the 90 shows, whatever that they did, held the band together. Dickie Betts, pros and cons about Dickie Betts. Dickie Betts during that time period was the best guitarist on the face of the earth.
Yes.
Filling 2 roles. Barry Oakley filling 2 roles, playing bass and guitar at the same time. This is just my opinion. Dickie's best playing ever for 5 minutes is on You Don't Love Me from Syracuse, where he just, in the middle of You Don't Love Me, takes a break and he just soars. I think it's around the 6-minute mark. He goes for 5 minutes, and everybody swells in behind him. It's magical. They couldn't sustain that. That wasn't going to happen. But they got through that period. And then they realized they needed another lead instrument. The best decision that doesn't get enough attention, instead of trying to put another guitar player in Duane's spot, which was not going to work, couldn't have worked, wouldn't have worked, you need another lead instrument, go with a keyboard. And you end up with Chuck, and you end up with Jessica, and you end up with brothers and sisters, and it worked. But 72, Syracuse, hands down, unbelievable. That
was the first 5-man band show I acquired on tape. Boy, it must have been a 70 millionth generation. I've later found out, and I just posted the interview a couple weeks ago. Tony Yokin, who produced Anthology 2,
Yeah.
was very involved in not only the actual show itself, the recording of the show, the archiving of the show, but he used to play it a lot on his FM shows. And John, that's when it all occurred to me how these tapes kind of made their way down to me. Was it wasn't as if it was played one time on the radio. It was these FM DJs were trading these reels and playing full shows, and kids were taping them. And so that's why things sounded okay. It didn't sound great, but, it was compressed, but it was Duane, it was Barry, it was, it was
Yeah.
the original Allman Brothers.
Yeah. It's a shame that all those soundboard recordings, got lost with the Mike Callahan situation, but it is what it is. And the other thing, remember, they were playing a lot of college campuses, and the campus radio stations would record them, and that's why you have Brewer Fieldhouse. That's why you have Swarthmore. That's why you have shows like that, because college kids were taping them. But anything with Duane on it, we'll take it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true, about all of us. Okay, we're going to do one more about the archival shows, and then I got about three more questions. 1973, got a favorite?
Yeah, there's so much good stuff from '73. I think we did put the best one out with Nassau Coliseum. Tremendous show. We have, I will say this, RFK June of '73 is ready. It sounds fantastic. There's just some legal things that need to be worked out. But you got Winterland '73. There are so many. Man, they were right in the pocket. It was new, it was shiny, it was a rebirth. Yeah, there's a ton of '73, but I think people will be very happy to hear RFK.
Yeah, that's good news.
Watkins Glen certainly had its moments, but I love Nassau Coliseum. Because you got all kinds of different things on songs not played that often, including a Mountain Jam where Chuck and Dickie do this beautiful call and response. It's like, good God Almighty. So yeah, that would be it for '73.
Winterland is mine, probably because I had the tape, and if I remember correctly, side A of tape 2, I call it 45 minutes of my favorite Allman Brothers this side of Duane, and it's I think is it You Don't Love Me into La Brea into one other thing. I can't believe I can't remember it, but it is.
I was struggling on the spot to remember the tracks in order, but what it was, they played Jessica, then You Don't Love Me, and then went into La Brea in A minor that included a bass solo and drum jam. 45 minutes of some of the greatest Allman Brother music of all time, and certainly of that Chuck, Lavelle, Lamar Williams, brothers and sisters era. All right, back to the conversation.
And then, of course, we have my favorite Blue Sky of any that Chuck Lavelle played on is from 12/31/73. Massive
that New Year's
Eve show. If I remember correctly, they were recording Winterland for a live album, or they were recording live, and that's why we have good tapes for it. Dickie flubs the lyric in Blue Sky. Yeah. And so that take is never to be used as a live take. The one from Cow Palace, New Year's Eve, 1973. Chuck's solo is awesome. Gregg's harmony vocals are pretty good. He hasn't fallen across the keyboard quite yet. Which does happen a little later in the night, it sounds like.
Yeah. Bob, on the archivals, just let me say this real quick. We have a great team that work. The same thing with Gregg's solo releases, going back to Danny Toller. There's now the third one is coming out soon, and people can hear how good Danny Toller was. But, it is a labor of love to get these shows cleaned up, packaged and released for people that really want to hear them. So very proud to be involved with that. and
I
those guys.
remember, yeah, I remember years ago looking at liner notes, which is what you do.
Yeah,
And, from Dreams Forward, Kirk West's name kept coming up. And I remember I wrote him a letter sometime in the 90s. I was just like, thank you. Like
yeah.
everywhere I see, like this is, you've been doing this. And, there's so much out there now, thank God. And there's, the bar for entry for finding music is a lot lower, and it's awesome. People are, I know this for a fact, ain't nobody stopping listening to the Allman Brothers, including, by the way, like I said, there are people who will defend Brothers of the Road. So if that's there,
Hey, God bless them. If they,
exactly.
you know, music is to be enjoyed, and
Yep.
if it doesn't happen to be your taste or my taste, that's fine. In like you put it perfectly, listen to you don't want to listen anymore.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
beauty of music.
To me, it'll never go. And we bring it back to history, both of us, as historians and the ways that we, make sense of the world, construct understanding of it. Music is a through line, right? I have for myself, it's a way I see the world. It is through sort of a music history lens or a history lens, just making sense of it, right?
Yeah.
So we've talked about a lot of the projects, but I want to talk about Allman Joy for just a second.
Okay.
So this is John wrote this book, Bill Connell with John Lynskey, Keeping the Beat with Duane and Gregg, Allman Joy, drummer for Allman Joys, and was on the earliest recordings of Duane and Gregg as the Allman Joys here, where I live in Nashville. A really important part of their journey, 1965, 1966. As the Allman Joys. They leave Daytona Beach. They're the ones to leave Daytona Beach.
Yeah.
Local musicians start in the garage. They move to nightclubs. This is how all of these bands in the South do. Then they start playing regionally, Orlando, Fort Pierce, Vero, maybe up to Jacksonville or something. And then, okay, now we have money. The Start Club in Mobile, Alabama. From there, now you're not just a local Florida band. Now you're a Southern band. And they were also trying to make it. Their first attempt at success was
Yeah.
with the Allman Joys. They went to New York and auditioned for Bob Johnston
Yeah.
with the Sandpipers, and then they record these songs at Bradley's Barn. So
Hmm.
this is an important part of Allman history, and this is for me as a historian, the books are as essential as anything in this stuff. So talk to me about the book. I know a bit about your role, but you can explain what your role is here and the story that it tells and shares with us.
All right. So what happened is Bill Connell grew up in Tuscaloosa, and he was a big influence on Chuck Leavell. Chuck was a kid watching the Allman Joys play, and as Alabama musicians, he came to know Bill. Bill was a great drummer. He was perfect for the Allman Joys at the time, and Bill's tenure in the Allman Joys got cut short because he got drafted, joined the Navy during the Vietnam era. Part of me believes that if Bill had not gotten drafted, he very well could have been the Butch Trucks in the Allman Brothers Band because Duane and Gregg loved him. It didn't work out that way. And Bill continued on in music, staying in Alabama, played with Bobby Whitlock for a while, things like that, got into studio work. Anyway, he and Chuck remained friends for forever. And Chuck and I are very good friends. And Bill had been talking to Chuck for years. Hey, man, I got all these memories. I got all these photos. I got all these stories about the Allman Joys that nobody's ever heard, yada, yada, yada. And so Chuck finally said, well, listen, I've got a good friend of mine, Jeff Craig, who helped Chuck with some of his books. And so Jeff and Bill started working together. And then unfortunately, Jeff, God bless him, was killed in a fall at home when the project was just in its embryonic stage. And and I knew Jeff well. Chuck reached out to me and said, listen, you know what happened to Jeff? Bill wants to continue. Are you interested? He says, you're the guy to do this. I said, okay, Chuck, I'll talk to Bill. Bill and I hit it off. I took what he and Jeff had started, built on it. Then Bill and I spoke probably almost every night for 6 months, sculpting the rest of it. You know, Chuck was very influential in it, wrote a very nice intro to the book, got introduced to a lot of other Alabama guys who had a lot of photos. Mercer Press said, this is right up our alley. And Bill told a wonderful story of, the past is prologue. And, not everybody starts off at the top. Everybody's got to start somewhere. I don't care, sports, art, music, whatever. You got to start somewhere. And this is where they started. And there was great insight into all this stuff. Duane's first marriage, how that happened,
Yep.
Bill's insight about that, and how Duane led as a leader even at 18, 19, it was there. And, the book came out, and unfortunately, it's a shame, Bob. Bill and I never met face to face. We were going to have a book release in Macon, and Bill, unfortunately, right beforehand, died in his sleep. So I never met the guy I wrote the book with.
Wow.
Yeah, but it is a great story. Bill had a great memory, great photos. I enjoyed that project immensely, and I'm very grateful for Chuck, that he reached out to me, and it turned out really well. And it is a nice piece of the puzzle, bro.
Without a doubt, John, probably, there are so many of these kind of books out there. There's a lot of self-published books, which, I
Yeah.
have them all. This used to be a bookshelf till everything fell off the wall. And so, but I bought all of the ones, and I don't know if you've ever read that. You've probably seen the one that's on Amazon, the Twigs one, the guy who knew Twigs.
Yeah.
Like, I even have that one, is what I'm saying. I'm not even going to say anything more, right? Like, I have them all. And,
Yeah.
and this is, this is not one of those. Obviously, it's very well written. And it adds a piece of the puzzle, because to me, right, in constructing the story of Play All Night, which is the story of Duane's, this is what he was driving to his entire life, was the success of At Fillmore East. This is my album.
Trajectory.
Boom.
Yes. Yeah.
And a big part of this is grinding it out on the Chitlin circuit, being threatened. And I can tie these stories into Gregg's book and into Scott Friedman's book and into the narratives that come in Galadriel's book and in Alan Paul's books and in the stories that are in Hittin the Note and that we read. And there's one in particular that you put a piece together for me here. I was writing about, how tough it was for them on the road as long-haired, again, it just says long-haired guys. I mean, we're not even talking traveling with JMO yet, and there was an incident that appeared it was at the Anchor Motel. It turns out Anchor Motel here in Nashville with Shriners, where they get a brick, where I think Gregg throws a brick at them, and then they come in and beat the crap out of the band, et cetera, et cetera. Bill tells this story in great detail, and it was like a side note in this article I read. And that's where you find these pieces in these primary sources, of which a memoir is a primary source. You don't have to just look at the actual piece of paper someone wrote something down on.
We're going to interrupt, pause for the cause. If you're enjoying this content, conversation from the crossroads, go be a paid member at longlivetheabb.com. So much more content. Really proud of this interview with John Lynskey, but I've got a whole bunch more in the queue and already published. longlivetheabb.com. Get a subscription and upgrade a subscription. $6 a month, man. All right, back to John. We left off was with your book, Allman Joy, which, there it is. Now I get to pimp my own book, which I really wish had come out before I wrote this book, Play All Night, because Bill and you just filled in a whole bunch of gaps on this, important period that is probably mostly important to us, hardcore Allman nerds, like it's, the music is good. They're a cover band, there were zillions of fantastic cover bands in the South, in this era. They were the best. But it's, talks a lot about their struggles. I'm fascinated by repertoire, the songs that
Yeah,
artists play. That was one way I was able to and play all, really think about Duane's career with the Allman Brothers outside of just telling the stories everybody knew, but what were the songs that sort of carried on? There's some songs they were playing in the Allman Joys that, Gregg records on the Gregg Allman tour.
yeah,
In
yeah,
1974, there's songs that he would play until the end of his life.
that's true.
Um, and so it really fit. I was just thumbing through it again. I told you I was going to look at it and preface to our conversation a little bit. The story that was in there, you may or may not remember the specific story, but here in Nashville, where I live, they parked at the Anchor Motel,
Yeah,
which makes me think of any hundreds of southern motels I've seen in my life, from Miami all the way up, as far out of the South as I ever got. I know where this location is. I don't think it's still there, but I think the Anchor has to do with Vanderbilt University. It's over there kind of at West End. And I had come across this reference. I was writing a chapter on really what the hazards of the road were as Southern musicians. At that point, just hippies, not even really hippies, long-haired musicians playing black music. And, Duane and Gregg were unabashedly fans, not only of black music, but of black culture, you know, very inclusive individuals from the get-go. And I told this story that I had found, I think it was in the Daytona Beach News Journal, about an incident that Gregg and the Allman Joys had gotten into with some Shriners.
yeah,
And it was something like Gregg threw a brick and they roughed him up a good bit or something like that. But do you have more like I can't remember, I can't recall the gist of the story, but like Bill legit lays out the entire tale. And I think it was that they were having problems kind of all week.
yeah. It's the classic bunch of drunken rednecks, you know, picking on the long hairs, and it got Greg pushed back on them a little bit, and the next thing you know, it's basically a full blown brawl until the police actually showed up. But yeah, it was just the good old boys having fun, with the is that a boy or a girl? What are you? That kind of stuff. So typical that continued obviously over into the Allman Brothers for that matter,
Hmm.
particularly when you had five white hippie boys and a black dude.
Yep.
There's the great story in Alabama somewhere where they were at a diner. This is with the Allman Brothers, and these good old boys started messing with Dickie, not knowing what they were messing with, flicking his hair. He just kept saying, you don't want to do this. You don't want to do this. And then they turned on JMO, and that was it. Dickie beat the living hell out of all four or five of them. And the proprietor gave them their meal for free. So
Yes, I remember that story and reading it. I think it was probably in Alan's first book, in One Way Out. I because those stories were very valuable in me building my narrative about, there's a real punk rock aesthetic, pre-punk rock, and I'm not saying like punk played like guys who can't play their instruments, etc., which is
yeah,
a misnomer of a genre that means a lot to me. But I will say though that the do-it-yourself, the damn the consequences that Duane and Gregg had in the face of that, and really all of them, because I know somewhere, I think it's might be the Scott Freeman book, but Dickie used to ride around in Manatee County on a little motorcycle with a jacket that
eat,
said "Eat shit"
eat
on the
shit in the
back.
back. Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
you know, these are six guys ultimately, right? Who and that's the extreme. JMO, I think, was the extreme on the other end, very, as I know, very pacifist and inward about all of that. But they were so determined in each of their own ways to just do it their own way. And to me, as a historian, as someone who interprets the past, who tries to make sense of it, um, the time period when Duane and Gregg are so young and immediately go out on the road and deal with some real adult stuff, the kind of stuff that the band talks about in The Last Waltz, all of
Yeah,
it. New York
sure.
City, an adult dose, as Levon Helm said, and
Yeah.
it's a great story. And you piece that thing together. They had been having issues with the Shriners,
Yeah.
um, who were the, somewhat respectable version, of the social club, not the, it was a social organization that was supposed to be doing, good in the community, raising
Civic
money,
things.
etc.
Yes. Yeah.
They are, they're the status quo, and Duane and Gregg Allman and the Allman Joys are not the status quo in the South in 65. And there's very real violent consequences for that. I mean, Bruce Hampton had said it as well, the sainted Colonel Bruce Hampton, that it was real life or death sometimes,
Yeah. It was. It was, but they believed in what they were doing. So Bill did a great job recounting so many stories, little tidbits from the road. You mentioned New York when Duane and them ran into Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck when the Yardbirds were playing, and they just
Yes.
started chatting it up like young musicians would, not having any idea where all of them would, what they would become. They were just, because the past is prologue, and now, of course, they're all legends and Hall of Famers. Back then, 60 years ago, they were not even barely 20, and they were just kids. So I got a kick out of that. Obviously, Duane getting married was a little bit more insight on that. But a couple of sessions, they did a session down in Birmingham at Botwell Studios that the tapes disappeared from. This was after Bradley's Barn and RCA in Nashville. And Bill said we went back a few months later to get them. They had disappeared. God knows what was on those tapes. But when you listen to any Allman Joy stuff, particularly the live bootlegs that are floating around. Yeah, they were a cover band. They were a really good cover band, but a couple things stand out. Uh, Duane Allman was already Duane Allman as a guitar player, and Gregg was on his way. His voice hadn't completely matured yet,
Yeah.
but he was on his way. And Bill Connell was a hell of a drummer. Um, so that was it was a fun project to work on, and Bill's perspective. Learned a lot when he went to Macon for Duane's funeral. I got some insight on Duane's funeral that I had not necessarily been aware of, you know.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was a fun project, Bob, and I just wish Bill had lived to see the
Yeah.
finished product. Yeah, yeah,
It's this is no, I'm not blowing smoke. This is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, of that genre of book in the canon of Allman Brothers stuff. Like, look, we can talk. There are books out there that
yeah,
are that have told the story. Mine among them, yours among them. Several efforts that you've been involved with a bunch over the years, and this one really did fill in some cool gaps. You add that to Johnny Sandlin's book that his wife and he did,
yeah,
oh, I don't know, it was like about 20 years ago, really filled in a lot of great hourglass gaps. You can see, and I had to, for my book, for my dissertation, I know Dwayne's the greatest. Of course, he touched me like no other artist has, but I had to sort of try to find an objective way to state what made him, so great and what made him so much better from Allman Joys to like the Allman Brothers. And it was his ability to make a cover his own. Something, by
yeah.
the way, Gregg mastered. You can call Joe Cocker one of the greatest interpreters of the songbook. I totally agree, but I put Gregg Allman up against anybody as
And
an interpreter.
And I would put Warren Haynes right at the top of that list too.
I will never take a minute of credit away, a bit of credit away from that man. The
You know,
encyclopedia, I call him the encyclopedia.
he can do anything. But if you look at where the Allman Joys were in 1966 going into 1967, when they were doing covers of Tracks of My Tears, and within 2.5 years, that same, well, the two of them anyway, were cranking out Whipping Post.
Right.
It's the trajectory of their careers, it just exponentially exploded in very, very few ways other artists have ever done. It's just amazing.
It is really, that is another thing that, is remarkable. I use that word a lot. I find the Allman Brothers story to be really, truly remarkable. But honestly, any band who has had success like that and endured tragedy has a remarkable story. Any artist does, and frankly, every human does, and I think that's why, for me, like it was a safe place to sort of consider that side of the world for myself. The music touched me so deeply, and had they quit in October, November of 1971, I would not have been able to see them in November of 1993 and jump on a bus and never get off.
Yeah,
Dedicate my sort of academic long-term pursuit over 30 years to write and make sense of this for myself and help,
yeah,
others share stories. And it is a remarkable journey. And then when you add, and this happened when I had my friend edit it, she kind of realized, oh my God, this guy was 24 years old. The wisdom with which Duane Allman, did and I know he's not perfect. I know that he was not in very good mental health, if you will, or maybe with the drugs toward the end of his life. He struggled mightily. He was working toward that. Everybody becomes a saint in death, and even Gregg says that in his book, but remarkable for such a young person. And I think you have to stop and say the career itself, right, goes from like 65 to 71.
yeah,
I mean, they recorded some before, but they're on the road
yeah.
recording at labels beginning in 65. It's really brief, and the height of his impact is even smaller in that thing. It's mind blowing, John. It's mind blowing to
Yeah.
me.
I mean, we tell people at the museum all the time, people want to know about the accident sites and everything. We don't concern ourselves with that. The bottom line is Dwayne and Barry have been dead twice as long as they lived, and their legacy continues. And then
Yeah.
that's all that matters. And so that was a good project. And I wanted to say one thing. Greg's there's a documentary that's been in the works for years that's coming out this summer. It's called Gregg Allman, The Music of My Soul, and it's going to be released, limited release in 75 theaters across the country this summer, and then we'll go to streaming. And it's a wonderful project. I think people will truly enjoy seeing it. I mean, everything with Greg takes a long time. This documentary took, God, over 5 years. Greg's book took
20.
it took 7, I guess, years off and on before that finally got complete. But good things come to those who wait. So
Everything in almond land is ages in dog years. I have found over these long tenure as a fan. I think
yeah,
the tape trading was so essential to me back in the day, and a way to sort of access the music. So, that gets out, right? That's the most critical number one thing, everybody, because that's how people find
yeah,
it. And everybody's got to work their way, to it, that wants to do the deep dives. And, it's crazy how many young people I know, young guitarists in particular, young musicians, um, who I hear from, whom I'm in regular contact with, who I play with, all of whom are just, these these disciples of this music that these guys started in Jacksonville in Florida
Yeah.
in the South in 1969. And the documentary, I just want to shout out My Only True Friend. I think that was Gregg's only songwriting credit on his final album, Southern Blood. But God, what a friggin' record.
Yeah.
That one slays me. Um,
Yeah.
that one
Very moving.
absolutely slays me.
I don't
Great,
listen
great
to it very
record.
often because it's just so poignant. Yeah, truly.
Yeah, I've written about it a couple of times because I find it, at one time in context of Laid Back, which is a lot of people I thought a lot of critics, it's an easy thing to compare any of Gregg's solo records to Laid Back. And it's a really easy conceit to compare Southern Blood to it. It's very, very similar kind of thing, mood, vibe, everything else. But, like I just thought it was a lazy kind of comparison. So I did a deeper comparison as to what it was. It was such a cool record. Um, and, like you said, listen to it a lot. The one I listen to all the time is Laid Back because that's just anchored into my soul. I had a question for you. I have two more questions for you on this round of the conversation. One is a wrap up from yesterday. You mentioned Callahan and something about tapes. And I think I know the story that because that's the biggest, I think, mystery most of us have is where are the soundboard tapes from 1970? They had to have recorded some of them, and I've heard different stories. But Callahan was the sound man. I think he did record, as I understand it. But we don't have Allman soundboards that made it out into the world that I recall. I could be wrong there. So the
There's a couple variations of the story, but the bottom line is Mike had an entire footlocker full of tapes. Mostly, a great deal of them apparently were cassettes that were just recorded on the spot. They didn't have enough money for tape. So,
Yep.
unless, like I said yesterday, they were at a college and the college kids were doing it or whatever. But
Yeah.
Mike had all these tapes in a footlocker in the Tampa area where he lived. Apparently, he got sideways with some disreputable people and his house got broken into and this Foot Locker ended up disappearing. It's probably at the bottom of Tampa Bay somewhere. Um, and it's a shame. But these things happen. Again, they were kids.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's the
It took.
story. There's variations of it, but that's essentially the story.
It got stolen, and if somebody knew what they had, this would be a very valuable treasure trove, even for people,
Yeah,
on the
but
undergrowth, even criminals. So it's gone, is what
mm,
most people figured. That was kind of the story I knew. Like, it was always Foot Locker. It was always a Foot Locker of tapes, and there was something to do with house broken into. And Mike lost his gig with the Allman Brothers in '73, along with Kim Payne, and
yeah.
I know he went off on his own and started his own sound company, stayed in music, at least for a time. But those guys, the roadies, they're pretty rough characters. They were
Um,
protecting the band, and were not very shy about being, uh, they ran with some tough folk, man. The Allman Brothers did, the roadies certainly did.
yeah, they were desperados. So yeah, that's the story, and it's too bad.
Yeah. Yeah, it is too bad. And like you said, it reminds me of how what a struggle it is and how valuable it is that these students were recording things at SUNY Stony Brook, or they end up recording the Manley Fieldhouse show once Capricorn realizes, hey, wait, like this is a valuable thing to put these guys on the radio.
Yeah.
Um, okay, two more questions. Do you have any favorite projects that you've worked on over the years, particularly?
Well, hitting the note obviously was huge. That 20 years with the magazine was invaluable. It was a great experience. Greg's book, which is a whole nother story for a whole nother time, was tap dancing through a minefield to get that done. Glad that happened. The archival releases, obviously, I think I've done 22, 24, something like that. Some of the Beacon box sets. I think the '09 Beacon box set with all the guests was a really great thing to work on. But I suppose if I had to pick one, the Gregg documentary, to put a lot of work into that. But the Trouble No More super uber gigantic box set that Universal put out about 5 years ago, was that was so much fun, and it was such a joy to be involved with that. And that was the one time where, when you're writing liner notes, word count is word count. That's it. I had an unlimited word count. They said just write what you want. And so I think it was, God, I don't know, Bob, 10, 12,000 words for the booklet from, A to Z. And we were in consideration for a Grammy for the packaging. I think we should have won. I think Flock of Seagulls won, which was absolutely ridiculous. Flock of
Huh.
Seagulls or Tears for Fears, one of those. But anyway, if I had to pick one, I guess that would be it. But I've just been blessed to do so many
You know,
different things.
I knew you were going to struggle with the answer to that question. And I was going to say, I was going to guess you were going to say Hitting the Note. And
Yeah,
I will say, one of the challenges of doing play, I'm gonna plug it again because hell, I can. One of the challenges of writing play all night, right, was the fact that the sources weren't, the archives weren't in any, I don't know what they're like now, but they were in, a lot of disarray. It was digging through some boxes, seeing if I could find
yeah,
any diamonds in the rough,
yeah,
and then hitting it really hard when I would go to the University of Michigan. I went and sat in their archives. To when I would go to New York, Boston, I would sit down and look through microfilm. And I mean, it was tedious, John, because it was like, even if I had the list of shows or release dates of albums, it'd be 4 or 5 months sometimes till you would, the first album came out in November of '69, and a review might not show up until February of '70, you
yeah,
know?
yeah,
And so
exactly.
tracking it down was really hard. And I've been very kind of determined to I've got my archives in a pretty decent order. I mean, I continue to mine the world because there's just more stuff out there. And, um, Hitting the Note was especially the early ones, when the
Yeah,
band was really open to talking. Dickie in particular, who clammed up in the early '90s, mid '90s, really was never the same kind of gregarious guy he had been, but he was just flowing with good stories. You could catch Greg on a good day. I think the first Hit in the Note I had, John, and was it you who interviewed Butch? And it was like a 10-page spread it was from like '94 or
oh
5.
yeah, yeah, yeah. We got
And it
on a
was
good
like
run.
Butch Trucks was, Butch is one of the greatest. You want an all rock and roll quote team? I'm putting Butch Trucks in the all rock and roll quote Hall of Fame. Uh, Rock and roll quote Hall of Fame, all timer. Butch
Sure.
was, I mean, he was also hyperbolic and a big personality, which makes his quotes even, like better. But he was such a good quote, and like that was it. You guys covered that. I think
Well, I
future
think
people. Go ahead.
you hit it perfectly. They were very open with us. We were their magazine. I mean, we branched out and covered all sorts of different people, but the world according to JMO. I mean, JMO
The,
and I talked for, I don't know, God, 15 hours or whatever over 3 issues where he
yep.
just everything. Even like you mentioned, Dickie, everybody at one time, and Haynes is a great interview. Derek is a great interview. But to get Greg on a good day, to get good Dickie on a good day, you know, uh, yeah, I mean, we did some really, really good things. I'm very proud of it, and it's carried over to the museum, so it's been a good
It's
run,
it's
brother.
Yeah, it has, and it's important. The piece I was going to say is it's a very, very, very important archive of of the latter part of the Allman Brothers Band's career and influence, because it does go into Derek, it does go into Susan, it does go
Yeah.
into um, Government Mule. You really covered the
Oh
origins of
yeah.
Government Mule
Oh
extremely
yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Um, and so that those were, I knew you would, get back to it. I knew you would struggle to say, like, which is the one, I'm most proud of, or, that I really feel. I'll give you some props on Trouble No More. The thing I love about Trouble No More is that rarities disc at the end. And the
Yeah.
thing I particularly like about it, three things. One is I'm not crying, even though it's not the greatest recording. It doesn't sound great, but Jackie P finally makes it on an ABB record.
Yeah.
Loan Me a Dime with the
I was
Jimmy Herring
killer.
lineup.
I
And
was
then
killer.
the Trouble No More demo, which had
Yeah.
really never seen the light of day.
Yeah.
I've talked, the coolest thing about, we genuinely know what Trouble No More sounds like in 1969 twice, because we've got the first album, we got the demo, we got the first album, and then 71. I'm sure we have it in 72, but and then we have it fully formed in 71 at, it's on Eat a Peach. That little, there's those little nuggets that are out there, the Cross to Bear demo that Greg did out in LA, that has surfaced, will make its rounds sometimes.
Yeah.
Really
You know,
cool little pieces.
you mentioned Laid Back. The other thing I forgot about this, the other thing I was really proud of was the Laid Back Deluxe, where we got everything that he did, that even more that came out on One More Try that got yanked so quickly. This included all of that and more. And as a laid back guy, the laid back deluxe is, you got everything possible on that one. Didn't get the attention it should have, but it's literally fantastic. We had all these live tracks also from the Greg Allman tour that we were going to use, but Universal shut the door on that, unfortunately.
Like the
So,
extra material to produce and
oh
stock
yeah,
and try to sell
yeah.
and
And
blah blah
so,
blah.
but yeah, man, good stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, let's finish with the final one. And
Yes,
we don't
sir.
have to talk about Allman Brothers. We can talk about anything, but this is conversation from the crossroads. It's about building community. And so I always like to ask people, how do you build community? Where do you find community? Um, in all its connotations, how do you stay connected to others?
I think through human history, like-minded people have a way of finding each other. I don't know how it happens, but it does. And in my life, it's funny how the word brothers kind of runs through my life. Columbus is run by the Marist brothers. And obviously, I have a tremendous community of brothers at Columbus. Guys I went to school with, guys I taught, as you know, that have gone on to become friends. In sports, there's no better feeling than being in a huddle. You want to talk about a community? That's a community. When you suffer together and win and lose, that's a community. And then music. Music is colorblind. Music doesn't music is ageless. And you and I are part of a wonderful Allman Brothers musical community. And I just think when you have strong interest in anything, you end up with strong connections. And always meeting new people that want to be part of this. And listen, I really appreciate you having me on Conversations from the Crossroads, and I thank you for everything you've done. And we are a little band of brothers, no doubt about that. All of us little our geekness, but geekness pays off for a lot of people, and I'm proud of what we've done.
Yeah, I'll tell you this, John, it's fun. And frankly, the way you're doing what you're doing is you can't think of not doing it. And for me, like just exploring the world and using this lens when it comes up to talk about it through this Allman lens, which is, which is the crossroads of Southern music history and culture. That's legit. Crossroads is an intentional term. Music history and culture is is the kind of historian I am. These intersections of where all of this comes and goes from. And by the way, shout out, Allman Joyce did record Crossroads. They recorded the Eric Clapton and the Powerhouse version. That's where they got the arrangement pre-Cream, but it is the arrangement that Clapton brought to Wheels of Fire, brought to Cream. But that was interesting to me too, John, when I heard that that Powerhouse, that Eric Clapton and the Powerhouse, this like electro sampler.
Yeah.
That's, I think, also where they got Spoonful from, that same arrangement of Spoonful, but I could be wrong there. Hey, I'm grateful. Thank you. We need to do something together in Miami and raise some money for Columbus. And I mean that sincerely. If you want to have a dinner and do a whole, like, I'll interview your ass for them and tee you up. So like, come meet Coach and hear him talk about, mushrooms and magic. So I'm serious. If I can, and I will happily, like, if you guys can get me down there, great. Otherwise, I'll do it on my own dime, just as a gift back to you. So put that in the back of your mind. If you want to try to sell like a table or something, my boys will pony up. I know they'll buy a couple tables. So
I'm not gonna put it in the back of my mind. I'm gonna put it in the front of my mind because I know the venue we could do it in. So that could be fun, brother.
Keep me posted.
I will.
And I'm grateful for you.
And I appreciate you, bro. And I enjoyed today. Thank you very much.
Likewise, my dude. Okay.